well. Thanks for doing this. Why don't we start out by hearing a little bit about you, like your journey through this, like how you got to where you're at.
Yeah, it's a long journey. I mean, I started really when I was 12 years old. I got the bug for it because I got an assignment to write a short story in English class, and um, the teacher loved it. She read it to the whole class, and um, just kind of gave me a really good feeling, and I just wanted to start writing. So I started writing. At the time I was reading Louis L'Amour books. So the first things I really started writing were westerns, which I still love westerns, but a little later on when I found Stephen King books and started reading those, I realized that was my niche.
What Stephen King was?
Yeah, something with horror and as well as thrillers, suspense. Dean Koontz is another
Hold
one
on one
that's
second.
great.
I'm hearing a little bit of a crackling.
Oh,
Are you
okay.
are you getting that on your end at all?
A little bit of muffling. I could try and take my headphones off and see if it works better.
No, yeah, I think I don't know. I played around with the microphone, so hopefully it'll be fine.
Oh,
But go
okay.
ahead.
All right. Yeah, so I started writing horror, and I just fell in love with it. Of course, I've always loved horror movies and things like that. And of course, being 12 years old and going in through my teens, I didn't know what to do with my books. Where do I go? How do I get them published? So I read up on whatever I could do and whatever I could find, and I submitted things and got a lot of rejections. But I just kind of persevered, and of course, I got married, had kids, and kind of had to take care of all that. And then, much later, I went back to writing again and just hit it hard and finally got something published in 2012. The
So
first
wait,
book,
when you started out, did you start out before the wife and the kids?
oh yeah, it was something had always had done since I was a kid. So, I really enjoyed it. Um, and then I got into writing screenplays for a time. I had an agent that was helping me during that time, but then she retired, and then I just kind of put everything on hold. And years later, more like around 2010, I suppose, is when I really went back to book writing again, and I wrote Damage Incorporated and just hit it hard and tried to find a publisher, and finally found a publisher, an indie publisher, to publish it, and that was the start of everything.
Okay, awesome. Is that still available? Is that like available on Amazon, stuff like that?
It is, yeah. They're all still available. Um, I didn't have a good experience with that publisher, and they ended up going under. So I got my contract back and my rights back, and I republished it myself. And I
Yeah,
had,
I have endless stories about fighting with publishers
oh
and
yeah,
even when you have a major publisher, it only makes it harder because they have a giant fucking lawyer team behind it. So it's like they play all sorts of legal tricks.
oh
And I
yeah,
hear I hear horror stories. So
yeah.
I don't
Sometimes
know
I
if
don't
that's
know
any
which way
better.
to. Yeah, I don't know which way to go because obviously the dream would be with a big publisher, because they give you a huge advance. But if your book doesn't sell enough to cover that advance, I heard that they could come back after you for that, or they just won't publish your book again and you're done. So
Well, I had a
there's
publisher that published he published two of my books. Well,
uh-huh.
I don't know if the he owns it, but my contact was a he, and so they published it and they gave me an advance. I was like, oh, this is awesome. Like I even like
Yeah.
posted, I was like, hey, my first advance and all that stuff. And then there used to be this thing on Amazon called Novel Tracker, and you could check
Okay.
your book sales. So I'm like,
Right.
why is my book selling way more than you're giving me a percentage for? Like, oh, well, those must be European sales. Those must be. And then all of a sudden, Amazon discontinued Novel Tracker. So they no longer have access to that. And then
Right.
my royalties went down even more. I was like, this is impossible. Like people be writing reviews. I'm like, well, obviously, if you wrote a review, you bought the book, and then
Right.
that wouldn't show up in the royalties. And so, yeah, it's a mixed bag.
Yeah,
People play a
definitely.
lot of games.
Yep.
So, Have you generally had like a rocky road experience? Is there one publisher you want to give a shout out to?
Yeah, the current publisher that I'm with right now, and I published 3 books with them, is Reddit Up Publishing. They're an independent publishing house, but the owner is fantastic to work with. She knows her stuff, and she does help with some marketing. And then, of course, there's 60 other authors with that publishing house, and we're all friends on Facebook, and we share and we help each other out. We read each other's work. We tell each other what works and what doesn't work for marketing, and so a lot of it, I have to do my own marketing as well, and you know, trying to get drum up sales that way and try to catch fire. And
Well, probably unless you're like a big name like Stephen King or Dean Arcus, you pretty much have to do it. Like I know plenty of people
yeah,
that with like major publishers, but they're not a big name, so the publisher just kind of ignores it. It's like if it makes money, and I take it.
that's right.
So, but
Yeah,
I've also I try everything that I think will work, and if it seems to be working, I'll keep it up, and if not, I'll like disregard it. But like I make videos for my books. Have you tried making videos?
yeah, I have trailers for a lot of mine. I also have 3 of my books on Audible, which I really like Audible. That's a lot of how I read anymore because it's hard to find the time to sit down with a book.
Yeah,
But
my latest book is on Audible, and that's my bestseller by far. I didn't even know. And once it came out on Audible, I'm like, dude, it outsells everything.
nice. Yeah, so I try and do everything. I've got some trailers put together, and there's a lot of sites out there that do promoting, but they advertise for a lot. Obviously, they cost money, but some of them are not all that good, and some are good. So sometimes it's trial and error, but that's why I like having some friends I could go to and say, "Hey, have you used this site before? Has anyone tried this promo?" And maybe someone will say, "Oh yeah, don't do that one. That one doesn't work." Or they'll say, "Hey, try this one," and I try it, and it works. And like I just recently had a promotion with Itsy Bitsy, what's it called? Itsy Bitsy Books, and uh, paid some money for that, and it drummed up a whole bunch of reviews for my latest book, and that turned out to be really good. That worked out good.
Okay, that's awesome. Let me scroll back a little bit. So you said like you were doing it, and then you discontinued everything, and then later on you came back to it. What was the big change, and what was the time gap?
Oh well, let's see. So I was always writing. I had written, and I will eventually get back to this book, but I had written a book, and it was called The Rage, and I really enjoyed it. I had it all completed. This is back when I think I was using a big clunky, not even a computer, it was a word processor at that time, and everything was saved on a floppy disk. And my young son, he was 2 years old, and he accidentally spilled a juice all over my floppy disk, and I lost the whole book. So I had to rewrite it. That was a long process, but actually it turned out better because my book turned out better for it. And
How
then I
old were
did.
you at this point when you wrote this?
Well, I was probably in my mid 20s, maybe.
Okay.
Yeah, and then I did get a publishing house that was going to publish it. I got the contract. I was all excited. I thought this would be the thing. And then the publisher went out. They went under. They filed bankruptcy, and I'm like, well, there there goes that. So it just seems to be a lot of roadblocks. And then I took a course on how to write screenplays, and the lady that was teaching that class, she was an agent, and she became my agent. And so I was really just doing a lot of screenplays. This is probably now I'm closer to 30. And then so I had some screenplays, and she was shopping around for me and helping me, and then I was helping her. She would get submissions, and she would ask me to uh, look at them and give it a yes or a no, and that was a really good experience for me. But then she had health problems, and she lost a son a really bad year, and she ended up having to just retire. And I understand that. So I really kind of put everything on the shelf at that point. and I would still write. I didn't know where to go. I didn't know what to submit or how to really do that. So I really didn't do too much with it. I would just dabble with writing for the next few years until, let's see, how old was I in 2010? I guess I would have been 40, right? I'm trying to think. Yeah, 40. I was 40 years old when I finally finished Damage Incorporated, and then I listened to some Tony Robbins tapes. They actually really inspired me. It said, hey, set a goal 1 year and get to that goal. And so I set a goal, and I think when you set a goal like that, your mind will find a way to get it to work. And so I did. I started looking for publishers again. I found an indie one called Damnation Books, and I submitted to them, and they
I've
published the
had
book.
very bad experiences with the Damnation books.
Yes. Yeah, and so did I. What
I think
maybe
they're out of business now. Actually,
they did.
Yeah.
I don't know if I
Probably
made
best
$2
for
or $3,
everyone.
So I didn't even get enough to buy a cup of coffee. But then, yeah, they went out. I think it was Caliber Press or something like that. Ended up buying their company. They issued me a contract to keep going, and I said no, just give me all my rights back. And they were really just didn't want to do it. I kind of had a fight with them, but I finally got them to give me my rights back. And then it took forever for me to get them to, get everything off Amazon and tell Amazon. And it was a long process, but I was glad I got my rights back. And then I just republished it myself, and I got a better cover on it. I had my son, he's an artist, and, he put this cover together for
cool.
it. It's really one of my favorites.
Yeah, I do all my own book covers, and I do a lot of other book covers as well. But I'm like,
oh, do you?
Dude, of course I'm going to do my own book covers, But I remember with Damnation Books, like I did a book cover. They're like, we love it, but we're going to have our art team, like, I guess it's not even really edited. Like they put like a framework around it and stuff. I was like,
right, yeah,
that looks horrible. It looks like a 80s illustration for like a bad comic book.
Yeah.
Like, and they're like, no, this is what we're going with. I'm like, actually, in the contract I signed, I get to choose. So we went back and forth. I literally had to hire a lawyer and sue them to get my book back.
Oh, wow.
And then here's what they did. They released the rights, and on purpose, they sent it to the wrong address. So my lawyer's like, okay, if they sue you, I'll back you up. And I just went to another publisher. But yeah, they're fucking horrible.
What a nightmare. Yeah. Yeah. Gosh, I'm sorry about that. That sounded like Damnation Books. That should have been our clue.
Well,
we were damned from the get-go.
I remember after all that, like I did some Google searches. It's like endless bad reviews for them.
Oh, yeah.
Like lots of people had problems. Some people like were still fighting to get their stuff back, and yeah.
And then I was gun shy again, to go with another publisher, and it's not easy. When I finally got with Red Adept Publishing, I went through 66 rejections until I got a call from her, and we talked on the phone for over an hour, and I could tell she had at least read some of my book or knew what it was about. She really liked it, and she signed me up, and we went for it, and it did really good. Actually, yesterday was the anniversary of my first contract with Red Adept. It's kind of interesting. So that was back in 2017, and my book was called The Crooked House, which she suggested for me to change the title. For one, The Crooked House makes it sound like a haunted house story, which it really wasn't. So I would upset people who would buy it thinking it's a haunted house story, and then people wouldn't buy it because it's a haunted house story. So I changed the title to The Other Side of Elsewhere. And I actually really like that title a lot better. It worked out good.
Well, like that sounds a little bit more unique. So, it sounds like you have a little more territory to explore there. I would think like The Crooked House would probably be like a haunted house story.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it totally made sense. And that's why it was good to get in with this publishing house, and I could actually get feedback because, before that, it's just me. I don't know any other writers, and I'm just doing this all on my own. And I really every writer needs an editor, or they need people to really give them honest feedback, and
No, I agree. Like I talked to a lot of like independent authors, and pretty much what they all say is they say there are a couple things that really, really help. One is have your friends read it.
right.
Another is read it out loud to yourself. Because when you read
Yes.
it out loud to yourself, then you kind of like the dialogue that might have sounded great when you wrote it down sounds stiff out loud, and so you change it.
Yep. I try that a little bit. I know I should do more, but I've always heard that. That's always a good technique too.
Right. And they also say like listen to what like I know I've been from this a lot. Like people will say like listen to reviews, especially when they're specific to what you're reading about. Like I wrote a story about the trenches of World War One. This guy goes crazy, in the trenches, and he's writing to his sweetheart back home, and somebody's like, "Hey, I like the story, but the letters do not sound authentic to World War One." I was like, "How do you make letters that sound authentic to World War One?" They're like, "Well, read some." I was like, "That's a great idea."
There
So
you
I
go.
went and I read some. I was like, oh, those are like the specific terms they use and the tone of the dialogue and so on.
Right.
I think that strengthens the story a lot.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, the more you can do with research and things like that, that's great.
I think it's a double-edged sword though, because like some people they they don't want to give you advice so much as they want to rewrite it the way they would write it. So like I said, it could be
Right.
great advice or it could be, you have to weed through it. You have to, you know, weed out the chaff and, stick with the like meat of the story.
Right. And when you work with an editor, a really good editor will keep your story, but they're just working on how to reword it to
Right.
enhance
So
it and
it
make it
flows
better.
better and so on.
Yeah. And they still, give you all the rights to say yay or nay to the changes. And I know that my first working with the content editor for the other side of Elser was fantastic because she said, I like this girl that's because it's about teen boy, 12-year-old boys and uh, back in 1982. So it's very much like Stranger Things. Um, and the main character had this crush on a girl, and she was in it just a little bit, but not a whole lot. And my editor said, I really like this girl. I want to know why she's such a spitfire. Maybe you could enhance that a little bit. So I decided to go back and include her a lot more, and I ended up writing so much more. And I think that's probably the best part about that book now is that character. It really brought the book to life. So yeah, advice like that is just um, golden. Yes,
Yeah.
it's really
Well,
needed.
I was gonna say, and like I guess I get off of this. I was gonna say, like the third piece of advice, like is I realize that you need to. I need at least I need to shorten sentences because I have like a lot I want to say, and I make it
Yeah,
all one sentence with like a comment between, so it doesn't flow as smoothly. And like I remember like I did Alan Moore seminar on writing, and like I know Shakespeare used a lot of iambic pentameter and stuff like that. Like, I feel like you don't have to stick it strictly to that, because
right.
that's a direct format that's very sing song. But definitely like shorten it into readable thoughts so you don't have to like go through three different iterations trying to figure out where you're going with this.
Right. That's what I saw. I have that problem too. I feel like I need to put so much information down in a sentence it ends up being too long. And well, now I'm getting a lot better at editing my own work and being able to kind of shorten things and fine tune it. But I tend to do what they call info dumping a lot.
Yeah, no, yeah, exactly.
But you got to realize, you got to understand that your audience, you don't have to tell them everything. They're smart enough to figure everything out.
Right.
So just touch on things, give them little things, and you know
Well, I've
unravel it
also
slowly.
noticed, like the editor pointed this out, is like I would say something, and then I would add like another couple words on it that basically say the same thing. It's like you don't need to like double down on the point. You
Right.
know, you more or less said that, you know, in the previous couple of words. You don't need to like cap it off by putting, well, that just makes it awkward and long.
Yeah, I get that a lot too. My editor will come back and say, "This sentence right here, you already mentioned this in a couple of chapters ago." I'm like, "Well, yeah, but I thought I should mention it again so that people
Yeah.
remember." And she goes, "No, you don't need to do that." You know, and she's right.
No, that's what's great about a good editor. It's like
Yeah,
they make your stuff stronger. So you have the
right,
idea and they just make it pop out.
right. I think it's the same with like even music. You know, a lot of bands will go without a producer and produce it themselves, and it can be good. But when they get a really good producer, it's interesting how much better their album is. I've kind of noticed that sometimes, and I think it's the same with writing. You know, it always needs an editor, even if at worst case you have a really good friend that reads it and gives a good critique on it, can help. But
Right. Well,
it
I
always
think like
needs.
initially I would just reread it myself, but the thing is, you kind of know where it's going, so you can skip over stuff. So you don't see it from that fresh perspective somebody else would.
Right. That's
So
the other thing I like to do is when I'm finished with a book, I like to try and just leave it alone and don't look at it for maybe a month, month and a half, and let it just kind of simmer and let me forget all about it and start
right.
working maybe with something else. Then when I go back to it, I have fresh eyes, and sometimes I look and go, what was I thinking? You know, I got to reword this here. So that's always a good technique too.
Well, one thing I've noticed is I've learned not to pay attention to it. Is people want it to they often want something to fit in the format. So like, why are you venturing into this? Why are you adding this? This should be the meat of it. It's like, well, I think the author knows better. I think a good example would be like when my first book came out and I did a cover for it. I thought, oh, well, this cover is based right off of a scene in the book. And, you know, the author said, well, you have a little bit of sci fi, so you should do a sci fi painting. I was like, yeah, but I have this tiny little bit of sci fi. He's like, yeah,
Yeah.
but, you know, it's mostly horror, but the horror fans will buy it no matter what. You should definitely. So he talked me into doing a sci fi cover. Then I had it republished by someone else. I used the original cover. It sold way better.
Oh yeah.
Like, like they often the editors like that's why the editors, not writers.
That's right.
So
Yeah, cover is a big thing. You know, unfortunately, we all do judge a book by its cover. And that's what catches our
I
eye
used
for
to
the
buy
first time.
books like that. Like I go to the library
Oh,
and I'd
I
be like,
did.
"Oh, that looks awesome! I'll read it." And I'd always be disappointed if like the cover was a scene that wasn't actually in the novel,
Oh yeah.
or the
That's
cover
why I
blew me
bought.
away. And I read the book and I'm like, eh. You know,
Yeah,
obviously they hired a good artist because that's
yeah,
what sold it.
yeah. That's why it started getting me to buy Conan Barbarian books. You know, some of the
Exactly. Yeah.
artwork on
Fred
those
Zeta.
is so
Yeah.
cool. Yeah,
But like all of his stuff looks so alive. Like you could feel yourself there doing it in the book. You're like, well, it's not quite as evolved as that cover scene, but you know.
yeah.
But I don't think what was it Robert Conan Howard? I believe
Robert
the
E. Howard.
Robert D. Howard. Yeah,
Yeah, he was the original.
he wasn't bad, but he wasn't like one of my favorites.
Oh
But
yeah.
I think the Rosetta pieces were definitely the strong suit of all
Oh well,
that.
yeah. It's undeniable. His artwork is fantastic. I happen to like Robert E. Howard a lot. He wasn't. You know, I know he could have been better. You know, some of his work was a little uh, chopped up a little bit, but some of his work was really strong in the horror genre too. Some of those Conan books were, yeah, actually a lot of horror in it. I
Well,
really liked it.
I think a lot of people that genre, like that era, you know, not even genre, the era, were like they had great ideas, but they weren't as smooth as people are today. But
Oh
I think
yeah,
people have also lost some of the great ideas now by being smoother. Like for instance, I would say like especially like later Stephen King. I wouldn't say the ideas are strong, but he's very smooth in his delivery. Like it's
right.
believable, it's realistic characters, but if you look at like one of my favorites, like Lovecraft, Lovecraft had
Oh
great
yeah,
ideas. I don't think his like you know everything he wrote was like a short story or a novella. If you stretched it out
right.
to a novel, it'd probably be a little bit awkward because his writing was a little bit stiff. but
Right.
great ideas. I think that's the thing with Robert Howard, like the whole Conan the Barbarian, and all the ideas, all the all the tales of the tumult and everything else he went through.
Right.
Great ideas. And if you got somebody who was like a really like I really like Neil Gaiman's current stuff. Like
Oh yeah.
like he could be writing almost about nothing, and he just writes so fluidly that you want to read it anyways. So like if Neil Gaiman was writing stories based off of concepts by like H.P. Lovecraft or Robert Howard, amazing.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Some writers you can tell just because I like to branch out. I like to read other new writers or writers I haven't heard of before, and I don't always just stick to Stephen King or Dean Koontz, or Clive Barker. I like to branch out. Robert R. McCammon's one of my favorites. But it's interesting how I'll read a number of different books, number of different authors, and okay, they're all right. I got through them, and then I'll go back to a favorite like Joe R. Lansdale, for instance. I'd go
Right,
back and start one of his. I'm like, oh wow, okay, there's a big difference. This
right.
guy is great, and you can really tell the great ones from just the mediocre ones. Yeah,
Well,
they can write anything.
I sound like an old man when I say this, but it seems to me like, people were more interested, back in the day in it being a cool story, and now they're more interested in the flash and how it's going to instantly impress people. And, they're less concerned about it being a good story. And I think a good example of that, like, is Twilight Zone to the Outer Limits, like, great stories, and now you
Right.
don't have that as much. It's more like, it has to pop you in the face right away.
Yeah, and I think it's because people believe, and maybe part of it's true, is that people's attention spans are much shorter. You have to get their attention and keep it, you know. But you can still do that with great storytelling. You can still do it with a great story. So I totally agree with you. I think it was Joe Hill, which is Stephen King's son.
Right.
His son,
Who
in the
went with the
interview,
name Joe Hill so people wouldn't say, "Oh, you're
right?
Stephen King's son."
He
Yeah.
wasn't writing his
No, he's a nice
coattails.
guy. No, yeah.
But yeah, his writing is fantastic. And he said, right from the get go, you have to catch the reader's attention, and you have to keep that attention going the entire book, because people get bored easily now,
Right.
you know.
Have
But
you seen Lock and Key?
oh yes, yeah, that's really
Yeah.
good. I like that.
Yeah, like
Yeah,
it's
that's
based
nice.
on the comic that Joe Hill wrote. It's like a
Right,
graphic novel series, and the graphic novel series obviously gets away with more than they could on Netflix. But both are
right.
great. I enjoy
Yeah,
both.
yeah, it's really good because I think what they have on Netflix is very family friendly too. But yet
Right.
it's a good story still, and it's spooky and atmospheric, and yeah, it's really good. I like it.
Yeah, no, I enjoy it. Like, and I think that like kind of as time goes by, they probably listen to the marketers too much because, like, if you look at like the first season of Stranger Things, it seems like it more of a punch in the gut than if you watch like the current season of Stranger Things.
Yeah, I was actually shocked with this last one. They're really going R-rated now with a lot of, you
Yeah,
know, but yeah, it's yeah, I love Stranger Things, and that was what was weird is I wrote The Other Side of Elsewhere long before Stranger Things came out, and then Stranger Things came out. I was watching it, I'm like, hey, wait a minute, this is a lot like my book.
right. Well,
But
unfortunately, that's the way it goes. Like I remember, Stanley Kubrick was working on Full Metal Jacket right around the same time as Oliver Stone was doing Platoon. Platoon
yeah,
came out before Full Metal Jacket, so when it came out, they
right.
were like, "Oh, just biting off Platoon." It's like actually they're way different, and I
Oh, they're
think
so
Full Metal
different.
Jacket is a much stronger movie.
Yeah,
But
as a
it,
matter of fact, yeah.
but it was kind of ignored because it's like, oh well, Platoon came out.
And that was the problem, is because I went to see Platoon first, obviously, and I love Platoon. And then when Full Metal Jacket came out, me and my friend instantly went to see it, thinking we we're going to see another Platoon,
Right,
and it was completely different. And I don't think I liked it the first time, but the second time I watched it, oh, I appreciate it so much better,
right.
And
Well,
I
my
agree with you.
dad's
This,
army, so I really enjoyed it. I was like, oh, I see where that comes from.
Yeah,
But all right, so let's get back to like you said that you started and then you kind of like went aside for a while and then got back into it hardcore. Like I
right.
feel like you kind of did the same thing. And like what really reinvigorated me is my wife died in a hit and run. And I was like,
Oh,
life
so
is
sorry.
really short. You know, if you
Yeah,
want to get something out, you gotta do it right now.
yeah,
And that just pumped me like it's not good that she died, but like that helped at least light a fire in my ass to do something.
yeah.
What did it for you? Like what told you you had to get back to this?
You know, I never really left it. I probably have stacks of I do have stacks of written stuff that maybe I never quite finished, or it's finished and I've just not gone back to it and tried to, I could probably go back and rework a lot of it and get it, published now. But um, I would always write because I have that need in me. It's just, and I get a little grumpy when I realize and then I like, oh, I haven't written for a while. And that's my release. That's my peace. When I can write, I can get, maybe sometimes I get out a lot of frustrations that way, or it just, like when you read a book, so is writing. It puts you in a different world, a different escape. And it's always been my escape. And I just never try to really hard to publish the work again until around 2010 or so. And then I started, you know, decided, I really need to do something about this. Most of it was, life is busy, and I had a lot going on in my life, and that takes precedence. So I
Right.
didn't really have a lot of time to, and like you said, I mean, that's really not an excuse. You got to just do it now because you never know, right? So one of my favorite comments, I think, is do it right now.
do
you know, you just
you
have to. Don't
do you
wait.
remember who said that?
I actually believe it was a past prophet of the LDS Church, which I know, but it works for everything, and I really like it.
Right.
Um, but where was I going with that? I was going to say something else. My brain leaves me occasionally. Well,
it
yeah, that's what I was going to mention.
it
I
happens with
read it.
age. You know, it happens to me too.
Yeah, now I can blame it on age.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of people that will come up to me and goes, oh, one day I want to write a book, or I'd like to be a writer sometime. And I'm like, well, I don't really say what I want to say, but it's like, well, if you want to write, you would have already written something.
Right.
That's just my feeling. And if you really want to
Oh,
write,
I get that
well,
a lot too. I
right.
get that as an artist. Like people are like,
Just start.
"Oh yeah, man, I could have made it as an artist," and I'm like, "Okay, well, obviously they didn't apply themselves. Like they didn't really try."
Yeah.
And they go, "Oh, see this," and like you look and you go, "Yeah, they." Like in your head, you go, "Yeah, they would have never made it."
Yeah. I mean, I want to be a great guitar player, but I don't even know how to play the guitar. I've never tried.
Right.
So I would never say that, you know, but yeah, I would say, for anybody out there that listening, I know there's a lot of people that are probably in the same boat as me, or maybe not even quite there yet. And they're writing and they're struggling. I just never give up. Keep trying. It's like I said, it took me 66 rejections before I finally got a yes.
Yeah. No, I think
If I
that's
had
important.
stopped at 65,
Yeah.
I wouldn't have anything.
No, I think it's important because, like, originally I wanted to be a comic artist, and I remember I kept sending stuff out and sending stuff out, and
Yeah.
then I got picked up by Paradox Press, and they folded. Then I got picked up by
Yeah.
Kitchen Sink, and then they folded. You know, and like I remember I interviewed with DC Comics, and they're really rude to me.
Right.
They're like, this might work in art school, but let me tell you what sells. They took out Superman comic, and yeah, so it's like you just can't let that get to you. Just keep trying to get better and keep moving on.
Yeah. Yeah. Just keep it going, because even if you never achieve that final goal, as long as you're working towards it, that's what
Right.
success is. That's, you can always say, I haven't given up. I keep going, you know, hits keep on coming, but you keep on
Well,
getting
do you
yourself
have
back up.
like different people have different takes on this, but like for instance, Stephen King was talking about writers. He was like, you need to write a certain amount every day. And I don't necessarily agree with that. It's like sometimes I feel more inspired and I'll spend a couple hours.
Yeah,
Sometimes I'll spend like 30 minutes and I'm like, I'm done for the day. I'm not gonna force myself
right.
because my my great ideas I got down, and I don't want to like come out with like mediocre product. I want to think about how I want the story to evolve next.
Right. I think it's important to write as much as you can, but I certainly don't write every day. I would like to, but I don't always have that time and ability to be able to do that.
Right.
If I still have a full-time job that I have to do. Um, if I was paid well enough, if my books sold well enough where I could do that full time, that's the dream. Then I could work every day, write every day. I could probably pump a book out every 3 months. So that's what the writers
Do
always
you
say.
feel
So
it'd
it
be
takes
as
about three
good though
months.
as like the ideas be as fresh and impactful if you pumped out on that that much of a basis, like that much all at once?
Yeah, and that's a good question. I don't really know because sometimes, like my latest book that just came out, The Intruders. Um, my first idea on that story evolved probably 20 years ago when I had
Okay.
that first idea. And sometimes I don't quite start on an idea like that until I get more that, I almost have to have the whole plot in my head before I really start writing. And
Well, I noticed in like some genres, like if you look at music, often like the first and second album by a band is like the classic.
yeah,
So obviously they sat for like, 5 years or 10 years, like thinking over and reworking everything. So it's like finally crafted and they put it out. And then, some now that they're popular, they have to put something out right away and
yeah,
they don't have as much going into it. So like their second or third album is never as good. Same
because
with
I don't have enough
movies,
time.
same with a
Yeah,
lot of stuff. But I noticed like with artists, for instance, often the later pieces get better. So I
yeah,
guess it kind of varies on like the factors going into it.
it does. I know with writing, I look back at some of my older stuff, like my first one, Damage Inc. and the Damage Inc. 2. I almost want to rewrite those, but I can't. They're time stamped,
Right.
right? Because my writing has gotten a lot better. Each book I continue to write, it gets better and better. And I really, I like that process. And, um, you know, yeah, and sometimes a book for me, I mean, it could take a year, maybe a couple of years before I really get it completely finished. Um, and sometimes the story changes a lot during that time and gets better. So yeah, I wonder if I popped it out in 3 or 4 months, maybe I'm missing something that might have inspired me a few months down the road. You never know. I know The Intruders, I had it completely written, and as I was going through it, and I had a few people um, do a beta read for me, just so I could kind of test waters with it. And then I realized, there's, someone was asking, well, I know you gave a description who the intruders are and where they came from because they have the supernatural ability and everything, but I didn't really delve into it too much. And so I decided to go back and rewrite that in, and I came up with a whole different idea where they came from, and it turned out so much better, you know.
Although I
And
do notice that some people they want everything explained, and I think some of the magic is if you don't explain everything, and often when like movie makers, like filmmakers,
yeah,
like
that's
when they go
also,
in and they
yeah,
try and explain everything, it's not as good. Like that little
right,
bit of mystery, is actually like, yeah, you're curious, but that's part of what feeds like the greatness of it.
right, exactly. And so you got to play that. You got to it's a fine line you got to walk and make sure that you're not putting too much in it. You want to keep it mystery, and I still did with this one. It was just I decided to tell the story of how it came about, like in a past story, someone as he was reading it in a book, and so I it turned out really, really creepy and atmospheric how it worked out, and it wasn't giving too much away, and so it worked out a lot better than the way I had it before, which may have sounded more like an info dump, like a couple paragraphs. Hey, this is blah, 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 blah. you know.
Well, I think like a great example of that is like Star Wars. Like everybody was like, wondering what the Force was and all this stuff. And they said, well,
Yeah,
actually, it's like midichlorians in the blood, and that's why like you just ruined it. Like it was great
yeah,
when it's
yeah.
a mystery, and you're like, what's going on?
I didn't know what that was in the original Star Wars movies. They never talked
Yeah,
about
yeah,
midichlorians or whatever those are.
yeah. When you try to explain everything, I think sometimes it's not that
Sometimes
great.
it's a little, yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes it can be too much.
What do you think about like people like kind of divvied up between first person, third person? Almost everyone hates second person. Do you have a
Yeah.
preference? Do you have something you read?
Most of my stuff is either in first person or third person. Um, and I think it all depends on the book I'm writing. It really does, and who the characters are. Uh, because there is a craft to do in first person. Obviously, it's all in one person's POV, and you can't break away into anybody else's POV. It's
Yeah.
all what's in their vision, and sometimes that is fun. I think what turned out good, like the other side of Elsewhere, is all in first person, and it worked really well because he didn't always know everything that was going on, and so the reader never found out maybe a few things that maybe you would have liked to know, but he never figured it out. So I can't put that in the book. And I think it was better that way. It left it more of a mystery, more of a, you know, I mean, obviously you figured out, we got to figure out enough, but there were certain events that happened that you just kind of found out happened because he wasn't there. So,
Well, I find,
and
especially the people that love to explain everything or they love to have everything explained to them, they
right,
really don't like first person because first person as much as the protagonist knows, and that's it.
exactly. Yeah,
And they're like, well, what about this? It's not explained. It's like, well, it's not relevant to the story. In fact, it detracts from the story if you include the explanation of what's going on.
exactly. And it can take it away. And, when when you're writing and when you finish writing and you're rewriting and editing and you're working with an editor and stuff, the main goal, I believe, is I want the reader to read from the first page and to the very last page and make it sound like I wrote all that in one sitting.
Right.
Like it just flows perfectly. And that's the goal, is to have it flow perfectly and not have it break off into this or be clunky or anything like that. So um, yeah, and I think there are things where you can put too much in, and sometimes that's still my Achilles heel that I gotta work on. And a lot of mine, all of my books, they run like images, like a movie in my head. So they're all pictured like a movie to me, and I just try to paint that picture as best as I can, translate it on the paper.
Well,
And
I think like if you look at like something like Lovecraft, obviously almost all of his stuff's in the first person. It
right,
works
yeah,
for him. But I think that in general, what I've kind of, because I started out doing everything in first person because I really like
right,
that, like you're in the middle of it. Plus,
right,
I'm an artist, so I'm like, this is what I would see, and you're not going to see that. You're going to have these long, boring lines of exposition unless you have somebody saying, "Oh, I see that right in my face," But it seems to me that what I found is if it's a longer story, people buy it because they get in the mindset of the person and they get in the
right,
flow and everything. But it's a shorter story. They just want to hear a quick tale. They don't want to spend all the time to get themselves involved in the silver. And they're like, that was too much involvement for that 30-page tale.
right. Yeah, when it's a short story, short stories are fun. That's why they're fun. You could just, you just put, this much of the story, there's this whole story, but you're just putting this much in it, and it's focused and it's fun.
Plus, you
Yeah.
can do more of like, is the info dump without sounding like an info dump. So, like,
Right.
you tell them more what's going on, because you're the omniscient narrator.
Right. And sometimes, you can't always backfill people's history as much,
Right.
or you're putting too much in. Um, Most of my books, though, I do write in third person because I like to, um, because I picture it like a movie. So, but I don't want to go beyond 3 POVs, because
Right.
I read some books that, and some are really good, but man, there's like 10 or 20 different POVs they're bouncing from. And, um, even my publisher said, if you do more than 3, the problem is you might write one character, and then 3 or 4 chapters down the road, the reader's seeking, hey, what's happening with this guy? You haven't got back to that guy, and you don't want that to happen. So I try to stick with, if I do third person, I stick with 3 POVs, and try and fit it all in that. There's a lot of the story that I know is happening behind the scenes, but doesn't quite get in the book because, you know, that's not in their POVs.
It's
And
not
that's okay.
relevant.
I just
Yeah.
have to, I just have to realize that's okay. You just have to find a creative way around that and make it work. And, so sometimes, well, a good example would be George Lucas in Star Wars.
Right.
Obviously, he had a whole, story set out, but he got the chance to make one movie and said, you know what, maybe I better do the fourth story of the movie because that has a beginning and an end.
Right.
So he, obviously didn't do the whole thing right up front. And that works, you know. And then he was able to go back and do the prequels, and we found out about midi-chlorians.
Yeah, and the prequels were nowhere near as good. Like that era
Oh
of
no, not at
mystery.
all.
Yeah. I think
Yeah,
the
it
era
was
of mystery really helps bring out. I think again, like the musicians that do like the first album. When he did the first Star Wars, he thought nobody would watch it. He thought
right.
it was gonna be a total failure. Like even like you had people in the movie and they're like, "Yeah, I'm starring in this space junk movie," and
Right. Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
it blew up, and then it was kind of a surprise to everyone. Like he was saving all the props from the first movie for the second movie because he thought they wouldn't make enough money to do the
Right.
second movie. And
Yeah.
then when it made so much money, they just scrapped all of them and made them all over again.
And then they made the most brilliant one of all,
Yeah.
Empire Strikes Back. Yeah. Yeah. It is that whole story is a good example, I think, of, sometimes you just have to take this much of the story and tell it. You don't need this much.
Right. I think one thing they did that was kind of brilliant is he like some of it was totally foreign to us and some of it was totally recognizable. So you had a
Right.
little bit to latch onto so you accept all the eccentricities and all that stuff around it because you already felt grounded in something.
Right. And if you have good actors, they're selling it to you. You
Right.
believe them, whatever they're saying, even if it
Right.
sounds maybe ridiculous, you believe it because they make it
No,
believable.
but it's totally true. Like it actually, the funny thing is like Harrison Ford. He did an awesome role with Han Solo, but
Yeah.
he was talking down that movie. He's like, "Yeah, I'm doing this crap movie," and they did an amazing role. So he still put his all into it.
Yeah, he really did because he's a professional,
Right.
and I think I think all of us, when we work on our craft, we're our worst critics sometimes, but we put our all in,
Right.
even if it's something that we are not all in on. But he was going to do his part still and do it right, and he did. And obviously, he's the best part about those movies, because he did it his way as well.
Right.
But
Well, you got to like I said earlier. I think you got to do it your way, but you got to listen to criticism.
oh,
Because
definitely.
people often like even if you don't take their criticism, at least listen to it.
Yeah, because then you get a different perspective, and then you can decide, okay, I see where you're coming from, and I like these two ideas you gave me, but this third one, I'm sorry, I'm sticking to what I have originally written or whatever.
Right.
Um, but that's that's how it works.
Right. Well, it's a fine medium, but
Yeah,
the people who succeed find how to ride that medium and
yeah.
make it work. But all right, man. So thank you very much for doing this interview.
Well, thank you
How
for
can
having me
people see
on.
your stuff and get a hold of you and like see what your latest work is?
The best thing is probably just go to my website, which is www.brettmckay.com, BRETTMCKAY. But you can find all my books wherever you can buy, digital copies from. But Amazon, obviously, Barnes and Noble, Kobo, Google Play, iTunes. So,
Okay, what's your latest book that you have out? How long
oh
has it been
yeah,
out?
so it's been out since it was July 5th. That's when it came out. This is what it looks like. So it has a really creepy cover of guys on there, which I really liked. It's a lot different cover than what I originally started at, and then when I came up with that idea, and then they generated it, like they did a really good job. That's one of my favorite covers. But yeah,
Okay,
that
and what are
came
you
out.
working on now?
Right now, I have another book I just finished writing, and so now I'm just looking for a home for it. And it's a thriller. And I've always liked westerns, and this is kind of a modern day western, but there's a lot of horror and supernatural elements to it, which makes it a lot of fun. So, and I placed it in Utah, in the southern canyons of Utah, so it feels like a
Is
western.
it modern era or is it
It's modern era, yeah.
okay?
And a lot of it has to do with and it all came to me. It's weird. Sometimes I don't know if it happens to you, but sometimes I have a dream and I get really good
Actually,
ideas
the
from the
short
dream.
story I'm reading right now is based off a dream I've had
Yeah.
repeatedly since I was a little kid.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's like
It's
I
interesting.
something happened. I ended up killing somebody. I buried them in the
Oh.
basement, paved over it. We moved, and somebody found the body. I'm like, holy fuck.
So this really happened to you? Is that...
It might have.
No. Yeah, that sounds like a good creepy premise right there.
All right. Well, again, thanks, man, for doing this, and
Thank you. It was
thanks
a lot of
for
fun.
having this
Appreciate you.
conversation with me. Do you have anything else you want to add?
I always I have about a million ideas to add, and I can't think of one of them. That's probably about it. I think, hopefully, I think everybody would like, my books. I think Cast Abroad thing where a lot of people I think would really like reading them. So if you're interested in them, just go to my website or find me on Amazon. Although, if you're looking and you Google Brett McKay on Amazon, there is another Brett McKay that pops up who writes books that you don't want to go to. Well, I don't know if you maybe you do,
I
but
think he's an inspirational speaker or something.
yes, yeah, he
Yeah,
actually. So you,
my video guy goes, "You're gonna talk to this guy?" I'm like, "No, that's the wrong Brett McKay."
I'm glad you realized that because a lot of people wondered that too. And even when I talked to my publisher when she called me before she knew me, she's like, are you the one that wrote, um, what is it, The Art of Manliness
Yeah, that
and,
was it. Yeah.
and How to Quit Porn? Like, no, I'm not the guy who wrote How to Quit Porn. That's not me. So if you find that, Brett McKay, that's not me.
Well, I'm sure this was a better interview because I'm not even convinced I want to talk to that guy. So, thank you very much,
All
dude.
right.
And
Thank you. Appreciate you.